For 3 decades, Johnny Carson looked almost untouchable. Night after night, he sat behind the desk, delivered a joke without missing a beat, and handled celebrities, politicians, and unpredictable moments as if nothing could surprise him. But there was another side to the king of late night, one that appeared whenever certain women walked onto his stage. Around them, the master interviewer could hesitate, blush, lose his train of thought, or simply surrender to the moment. Sometimes it was a dangerous joke, sometimes a look, sometimes nothing more than a smile that lasted a second too long. These women discovered something millions of viewers rarely got to see: the man behind the legend. And the first woman on our list didn't need beauty alone to unsettle Johnny Carson. She had something far more dangerous: words. Actor number 1, Sally Field. By the late 1970s, Sally Field had already traveled a remarkable distance from the wholesome image that first made her famous. The shadow of the flying nun was fading, replaced by the reputation of a serious actress, strengthened by her Oscar-winning performance in Norma Ray. Yet what made Sally so difficult for Johnny Carson to handle had surprisingly little to do with glamour. She looked approachable, petite, bright-eyed, warm. Her smile carried none of the intimidating distance associated with many Hollywood stars. And for a man who had spent years surrounded by polished celebrities, that ordinary warmth could be far more disarming than obvious beauty. When Sally appeared on The Tonight Show, something changed in Johnny. The usual distance disappeared. Normally, the desk gave him a comfortable barrier between himself and his guests. With Sally, he seemed to lean toward her instead, resting his chin on his hand and listening with unusual concentration. His expression wasn't the playful inspection viewers might have seen when Raquel Welch sat beside him. It was softer, more personal, almost unmistakably admiring. Sally seemed affected too. She would laugh nervously, touch her hair, and occasionally blush when Johnny complimented her. Then came the moments that made the audience feel as though they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. The conversation would suddenly stop. For a few seconds, neither said anything. They simply looked at one another and smiled. The studio audience understood the difference immediately. These weren't the pauses of a comedian waiting for a punchline. They felt intimate. Even the room seemed reluctant to interrupt them. Eventually, the rumors became more than rumors. Around 1979 and 1980, Johnny Carson and Sally Field actually dated for a brief period. That changed the atmosphere of her Tonight Show appearances completely. What had once looked like chemistry between host and guest now carried the unmistakable tension of two people who knew each other beyond the cameras. Johnny could tease her from behind the desk, while Sally could turn the teasing back on him. One anecdote even recalled Johnny comparing her to a little frog because of her large, expressive eyes and energetic personality. Rather than taking offense, Sally transformed the comment into an affectionate private joke. And during one particularly intimate exchange, Johnny reportedly looked into her eyes and imagined what might happen if they kissed. Whether she would become a princess, or perhaps he would become a prince. Sally lowered her head, laughed, and tried to hide her blush as the audience erupted. For once, Johnny wasn't performing confidence. He seemed genuinely caught up in the woman sitting beside him. The relationship, however, was short-lived. Johnny was a complicated and lonely man, difficult to live with, while Sally needed greater stability. They eventually separated amicably and retained their respect for one another. But those broadcasts preserved something more revealing than a romance. They captured Johnny Carson without the armor of the late-night host, simply a man trying to impress someone he liked. And if Sally Field could make the king look lovesick, the next woman discovered an entirely different way to make him lose control, without needing romance at all. Actor number 2, Dolly Parton. Johnny Carson had spent decades learning how to remain composed under pressure. Politicians couldn't easily shake him. Movie stars couldn't intimidate him. Even outrageous guests rarely managed to break through the polished exterior of the man behind the Tonight Show desk. Then Dolly Parton walked in. Her effect was completely different from Sally Field's. There was no quiet romantic tension at first. Dolly arrived like a burst of sunlight. Blonde hair piled high, rhinestone-covered clothes sparkling beneath the studio lights, and the unmistakable personality that had already made her a force in popular culture. And then there was the feature audiences could hardly ignore. Dolly's famously emphasized bust, showcased by the deep-cut fashions that became part of her public image. The moment she took her place beside Johnny, his biggest problem became surprisingly simple. Where was he supposed to look? Johnny was known for maintaining eye contact with his guests, but Dolly's appearance made that rule considerably harder to follow. His eyes occasionally drifted downward before he caught himself. Unlike the tense awkwardness that could accompany his interviews with Raquel Welch, however, Dolly's encounters with Johnny became pure comedy. He laughed. He covered his face. Sometimes he bent toward the desk, as if he needed a moment to recover. When Dolly leaned forward while telling a story, Johnny might dramatically wipe his forehead or collapse into laughter. And Dolly understood exactly what was happening. She knew how she looked, and more importantly, she knew how to control the situation. Rather than making Johnny feel embarrassed, she turned the entire problem into part of the entertainment. During a memorable 1977 appearance, she wore an especially tight, sparkling outfit. Johnny struggled to find a compliment that wouldn't sound too suggestive, eventually joking about how much he would like to know what kind of construction was hidden beneath it. Dolly didn't recoil. She laughed, lightly tapped his hand, and essentially gave him permission to look. The embarrassment vanished instantly. Dolly had taken control of the joke by openly acknowledging the image she had created for herself. That was her particular talent. Beneath the exaggerated blonde persona was a sharp understanding of people. She could play innocent without ever actually losing control of the conversation. Johnny represented the sophisticated world of late-night television. Quick sarcasm, polished timing, and urban wit. Dolly brought something warmer and more homespun. She called him honey and darling in her unmistakable southern voice, complimented his appearance, and made one of the most powerful men in American television feel like a handsome neighbor being flirted with across a front porch. Sometimes Johnny laughed so hard he couldn't continue the interview. He would remove his glasses, wipe away tears, and simply surrender to Dolly's energy. What viewers saw wasn't merely attraction. It was admiration. Johnny seemed genuinely delighted by a woman who refused to apologize for herself. Dolly wasn't trying to turn the interview into a romance. She understood something more valuable. If she could make Johnny Carson, the man who rarely lost control, laugh like a kid, she had already won the room. And yet, there was another woman who could unsettle Johnny without overpowering him with comedy or glamour. She could do it by making him feel as though he were the one being interviewed. Actor number 3, Angie Dickinson. Angie Dickinson entered Johnny Carson's world with a completely different kind of power. By the mid-1970s, she was already famous as Sergeant Pepper Anderson on Police Woman, a character who represented intelligence, authority, and confidence. She wasn't the woman waiting for someone else to solve the mystery. She was the one carrying the gun and running the investigation. That same energy followed her onto the Tonight Show stage. When Angie sat across from Johnny, the dynamic didn't resemble a conventional celebrity interview. It often felt more like two people engaged in a private game. Sometimes flirtatious, sometimes competitive, and sometimes resembling an ex-couple who knew exactly where the other's weak points were. For years, audiences and tabloids wondered whether Johnny and Angie were actually dating. Neither publicly confirmed the rumors, but neither seemed eager to completely destroy the mystery either. Instead, the uncertainty became part of the performance. and Angie almost always seemed to have the advantage. Johnny behaved differently around her. With Raquel Welch, he could become visibly awkward. With Angie, he became guarded. His eyes carried mischief because he knew she was too intelligent to fall for the standard tricks of the late-night host. Then Angie would reverse the interview. Johnny was supposed to ask the questions. Angie sometimes decided that she would rather ask him. His love life was an obvious target. His divorces, his bachelor habits, and the rumors surrounding him could suddenly become fair game. She delivered the questions gently, almost affectionately, the way someone might tease a person whose secrets they already knew. On one memorable occasion, Angie commented that Johnny looked tired and wondered whether he'd been awake late doing something the previous night. The studio exploded. Johnny understood the implication immediately. The man famous for always having a response suddenly had nowhere safe to go. He smiled. He tapped his pencil. He looked toward Ed McMahon as if hoping someone might rescue him. Angie simply waited. That was her weapon. Patience. She didn't need to make a dramatic move. She could look at Johnny, let the silence stretch, and allow the audience to imagine the answer he wasn't going to give. Viewers noticed everything. Johnny might straighten his tie after Angie called him handsome. She could casually touch his hand. Their eye contact sometimes lasted just a little longer than ordinary conversation required. The attraction, whether real or simply masterful television chemistry, was built around equality. Angie wasn't submissive. She sat with confidence, crossed her legs, kept her posture straight, and behaved as though the king of late night were simply another man sitting across from her. And Johnny seemed to enjoy being challenged. He liked intelligent women. With Angie, he didn't have to pretend to be invulnerable or perfectly polished. He could be a middle-aged man carrying his own complications, and she appeared comfortable with that. Once, when Angie jokingly complained that Johnny never called her, he answered with a line that sounded less like a joke than a disguised confession. He didn't call because he was afraid that if she answered, he might never want to hang up. The audience loved it. Angie Dickinson didn't need revealing clothes or outrageous innuendo. Her power came from knowing exactly where Johnny's defenses were and being confident enough to press them. But there was another kind of beauty that could defeat Johnny's composure even more directly. She didn't interrogate him. She didn't tease him about his secrets. She simply sat down beside him and made his eyes betray him. Actor number 4, Raquel Welch. When Raquel Welch appeared on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson faced a problem that had nothing to do with his preparation. It was concentration. In the 1970s, Raquel Welch had become one of the world's defining sex symbols. Her image in the fur bikini from 1 million years BC had become legendary, appearing on bedroom walls and living in the imagination of an entire generation. But Raquel herself wanted something more complicated. She wanted to be recognized as a serious actress. That contradiction became the heart of her appearances with Johnny. Raquel could be discussing feminism, demanding respect for her talent, or explaining how frustrating it was to be reduced to an image. And meanwhile, Johnny was struggling to keep his attention where it belonged. Her wardrobe certainly didn't make the task easier. Deep-cut dresses and tightly fitted jumpsuits were common features of the era. And when Raquel settled into the chair beside Johnny, his familiar nervous habit often appeared. The pencil. Fans who knew Johnny understood the signal. When he felt tense or uncertain, he might tap the double-ended pencil against the desk, spin it in his hand, or keep fidgeting with it. Around Raquel, that pencil seemed to become a full-time occupation. The funniest moments came when Raquel was being completely serious. She might lean forward to emphasize a point, speaking passionately about wanting her acting ability to be taken seriously. Johnny would suddenly go quiet. His gaze might drift toward the ceiling, then toward the water glass, anywhere except the obvious distraction in front of him. The audience caught on before he did. Laughter spread through the studio, and Johnny would realize that everyone had noticed his struggle. Sometimes he turned directly toward the camera with a resigned expression, almost as if silently admitting that there were limits to what even Johnny Carson could withstand. That reaction made him relatable. He was trying to remain respectful and professional, while also being an ordinary man confronted with extraordinary beauty. Raquel seemed to understand the joke without making it cruel. She would touch her hair, laugh freely, and occasionally touch Johnny's hand. At times, she would interrupt the illusion that he was paying perfect attention with a simple question. "Johnny, are you listening?" His answer was usually another joke. He might insist that he was listening perfectly, except that his heartbeat was making it difficult to hear her voice. On another occasion, when Raquel complained that the press focused too heavily on her body, Johnny picked up a magazine featuring her photograph and pretended to study it seriously. He began offering an opinion, paused, stared at the picture, and then admitted that he had forgotten what he was going to say. That was the essence of Raquel's effect. She didn't need to flirt aggressively. Her presence did the work. After interviews, Johnny could regain his composure enough to stand and escort her off stage with his usual gentlemanly manners. But there were moments when he seemed to hold her hand slightly longer, or wipe his forehead once she had disappeared behind the curtain. For Johnny Carson, Raquel Welch wasn't simply another celebrity interview. She was an endurance test, and every time his composure cracked, the audience got something more valuable than perfection. They got to see the human being underneath the television legend. Still, none of that quite prepared Johnny for the woman who could turn a sophisticated late-night interview into a verbal ambush with nothing more than a smile, a diamond necklace, and one dangerously innocent question. Actor number 5, Zsa Zsa Gabor. If Johnny Carson had one weakness he could never completely defend against, it was a woman who understood the power of language. Zsa Zsa Gabor understood it perfectly. With her elaborately styled blonde hair, sparkling diamonds, unmistakable Hungarian accent, and favorite word, darling, Zsa Zsa brought an entire persona of glamorous European luxury onto the Tonight Show stage. She was famous less for conventional acting achievements than for being unmistakably herself. And that self-confidence made her dangerous. Zsa Zsa had been married 9 times, and she treated the subject of men, romance, and marriage with a playful boldness that could turn an ordinary interview into a verbal duel. Johnny might begin the conversation as the hunter, asking the questions and controlling the rhythm. Within minutes, he could find himself defending against her. Her favorite tactic was innocence. She could say something with 2 possible meanings, one perfectly harmless and another unmistakably suggestive, while maintaining an expression that suggested she had no idea why anyone was laughing. Johnny, of course, understood. That was the problem. Every time Zsa Zsa took the guest chair, the atmosphere changed. She might praise Johnny's suit, criticize his style, or tease him about his romantic life. On one occasion, she reportedly leaned close and compared him to one of her former husbands. Charming and talented, but apparently too cheap to keep. Johnny's safest response was laughter. There was even a running legend that perfectly captured their chemistry. According to the famous story, Zsa Zsa once brought a snow-white Persian cat onto the set. She stroked the animal in her lap, looked toward Johnny, and asked whether he wanted to pet it. In English, the word could refer innocently to the animal, while also carrying a vulgar double meaning. The studio supposedly froze. Producers feared the broadcast might run into trouble, and Johnny Carson, who had built a career on finding the perfect response in impossible moments, simply looked at her. Then he looked at the cat, then back at Zsa Zsa. After a pause, the legendary comeback was said to have arrived. He would be happy to, but first, the cat had to be removed. The audience erupted. Whether the exchange aired exactly that way remains disputed. Later archival discussions suggested that the line may never have been broadcast, or may have appeared in a gentler form. But the story survived because it perfectly represented the relationship viewers believed they were watching. Zsa Zsa supplied the bait. Johnny tried to escape the trap. And somehow, both came out looking brilliant. She continued playing with him through the subject of marriage, even suggesting that Johnny himself might be a target. There were moments when he tapped his pencil, looked toward Ed McMahon, and joked as though he couldn't decide whether Zsa Zsa was proposing to him or threatening him. She could even invade his personal space, inspecting his clothing or demanding to know whether his jacket contained shoulder pads, turning the powerful host into something resembling a nervous schoolboy. And that was what made Zsa Zsa so memorable. Raquel could overwhelm Johnny's eyes. Angie could challenge his mind. Dolly could break down his composure with laughter. Sally could reach his heart. But Zsa Zsa attacked his defenses through words. She proved that confidence could be more disarming than beauty itself. Johnny Carson might command an entire television network every night, but sitting opposite Zsa Zsa Gabor, he sometimes looked like the one being interviewed. And perhaps that is why these moments endured. The king of late night wasn't defeated because he was weak. He was memorable precisely because, for a few minutes, these women reminded America that behind the perfect timing, the sharp jokes, and the legendary desk was simply a man, capable of being surprised, embarrassed, amused, challenged, and even genuinely moved. That may have been the real secret of Johnny Carson's greatest interviews. The moments when the king stopped acting like one. Actor number 6 Cher. By the time Cher became a familiar face on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson had already interviewed nearly every kind of celebrity imaginable. He could handle comedians, actors, musicians, politicians, and personalities who arrived determined to steal the spotlight. But Cher brought something different to the desk. She had confidence without needing to announce it. Her career had already taken her from the musical partnership of Sonny and Cher into a successful solo career. And her image was unlike almost anyone else in American entertainment. Long dark hair, distinctive fashion, a striking presence, and a personality that could shift from serious to playful in seconds made Cher impossible to treat like an ordinary guest. And Johnny knew it. The interesting part of their chemistry was that Cher never seemed intimidated by the man sitting behind the famous desk. She could laugh at herself, challenge Johnny, and respond to his jokes without becoming overwhelmed by the rhythm of the interview. That changed the balance. Normally, Carson controlled the conversation. He decided when a joke landed, when a subject changed, and when the audience should laugh. With Cher, the exchange often felt more like a contest between two performers who understood exactly how television worked. Johnny would tease her about her image, her career, or the extraordinary attention surrounding her appearance. Cher could answer without hesitation, sometimes turning the joke back toward him before he had time to prepare a response. That was part of her appeal. She didn't need to behave like a traditional Hollywood beauty, sitting nervously beside the host. Cher could be glamorous and completely self-aware at the same time. She understood that Johnny's greatest weapon was humor, and she wasn't afraid to use the same weapon against him. The audience could see the difference. Johnny's expressions became more animated. His laughter came more freely. Instead of simply guiding Cher through an interview, he seemed to enjoy discovering where the conversation might go next. And Cher had another advantage. She wasn't afraid of uncomfortable subjects. Her career had involved reinvention, public relationships, fashion controversies, and an image that frequently challenged conventional expectations of what a female star was supposed to look like. Carson could joke about those things, but Cher could meet him on equal ground. That equality created the real tension. She wasn't simply another beautiful woman appearing on Johnny's program. She was a performer who understood the machinery of fame almost as well as he did. The result was a different kind of late-night battle. Johnny could make the audience laugh, but Cher could make Johnny laugh. He could ask the question, but she could turn the answer into another opportunity to tease him. And that is why her appearances fit so naturally into the strange history of Johnny Carson's most memorable female guests. Some women unsettled him through beauty, others through romance, intelligence, or outrageous humor. Cher did it through confidence. She never needed to overpower Johnny. She simply refused to be overpowered by him. And once the audience had watched Johnny face a woman who could match him joke for joke, another question remained. What happens when the woman across from him brings not only beauty and confidence, but decades of experience playing glamorous, dangerous characters? That answer arrived with one of television's most sophisticated stars. Actor number 7, Joan Collins. Joan Collins belonged to a completely different world of glamour. By the time she became internationally famous as Alexis Colby on Dynasty, Collins had already spent decades building a career in film and television. She knew Hollywood from the inside. She understood publicity, performance, elegance, and the carefully controlled image that came with being a major star. That experience made her a particularly fascinating guest for Johnny Carson. Collins did not enter the Tonight Show studio like someone waiting to be discovered. She arrived with a fully established identity, elegant, confident, sharply dressed, and completely comfortable in front of an audience. She could command attention without raising her voice. And Johnny recognized that immediately. Their chemistry depended less on obvious romantic tension and more on sophistication. Carson could throw a joke toward Collins, expecting the usual celebrity reaction, only to receive an answer delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years learning how to survive Hollywood's spotlight. That made her dangerous in a very particular way. Johnny was accustomed to guests who became nervous when he teased them. Collins rarely gave him that advantage. She could accept a compliment without appearing flustered, respond to a joke without losing her composure, and move through a conversation with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much attention she was attracting. Her glamorous image also became part of the entertainment. By the 1980s, audiences associated Collins with powerful, sophisticated women, particularly because of Alexis Colby on Dynasty. But beneath that television persona was a performer who understood comedy and knew how to play along with Carson's style. Johnny could joke about her beauty and public image, but Collins could simply smile and keep the conversation moving, never allowing herself to become merely the object of the joke. That distinction mattered. With some guests, Carson was clearly the one controlling the room. With Joan Collins, the exchange felt more balanced. She knew when to pause, when to smile, and when to give Johnny just enough material for another joke. The audience wasn't simply watching an interviewer speak with a glamorous actress. They were watching two highly experienced television personalities test each other's timing. And that was the real attraction. Johnny's legendary composure worked best when he could predict the rhythm of a conversation. Collins was comfortable enough to disrupt that rhythm without making the moment feel forced. She could remain elegant while still being playful. She could discuss her career while allowing the audience to enjoy the glamorous image surrounding her. And she could sit beside the king of late night without behaving as though she had entered his kingdom as a visitor. She looked like she belonged there. That is what makes Joan Collins an appropriate final chapter in this story. Sally Field revealed Johnny's softer, romantic side. Dolly Parton turned his composure into laughter. Angie Dickinson challenged him intellectually. Raquel Welch tested his ability to stay focused. Zsa Zsa Gabor attacked him with words. Cher met his confidence with confidence of her own. And Joan Collins represented something slightly different. The woman who could walk into Johnny Carson's world already knowing exactly how the game was played. For a man famous for controlling the conversation, that was perhaps the most intriguing challenge of all. Because Johnny Carson's greatest television moments weren't always the ones where he had the perfect comeback. Sometimes, They were the moments when another performer was good enough to make the king share the spotlight.